So we're going to read that now from Matthew chapter 5. So if you want to grab a Bible from the table near you or one that you've brought with you to church, Matthew is in the New Testament and it's chapter 5, so it's the big number 5. And we're starting at verse 13, so that's then the small number 13. And it's in the blue Bibles, it's on page 969 if you want to find that and read along. It says this: "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called last or least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Wonderful. So over these last few weeks, as I've said, we've been thinking about the house that God builds. Not a house built of bricks and pallets like our rather poor attempt here, but a house that's built together as a people, as a family, a house that's shaped by Jesus. And so we've talked about foundations, our foundations being that God looks at us and he loves us before we do anything. And then we've explored what does it mean to join, to serve, and to pray as part of this family. And today we're thinking about what does it mean to give as part of the family. And we're going to do that by looking at the windows of a house. Now, I'm making a big assumption here, but I'm assuming each one of you in the house you live in has a window, at least a window. So could you just quickly turn to someone near you and just tell them, firstly, when you look out of your lounge window, what do you see? And then maybe a little bit more tricky, if someone was stood outside your lounge window looking into your lounge, what would be the first thing that they saw? Maybe the TV, maybe a mess. I don't know. Very quickly, just turn to your neighbor. Okay, bring those little conversations to a close. Now, windows, it may be you live in a very grand house and actually your windows are really magnificent. But generally speaking, windows, by definition, they're pretty normal. They're pretty like see-through. There's not a lot to them. That's the idea. Windows aren't really about showing off. Like you don't put a window in your house to show off your house. They don't exist so that people walk by on the road and go, "Oh, that's a lovely piece of UPVC double glazing." That's not why they exist. The reason we have windows on our house is so that it lets the light in and also it lets the house breathe. It like stops life being shut inside. Windows, when you open them, let a house breathe. They let light in. They let light out. They stop a home becoming like a bunker. And that kind of image, light in, light out, sits at the heart of the Bible passage that we've heard today. Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth." It's quite a weird thing to say. Jesus says, "You are the light of the world." And if you think about it, salt and light, like if Jesus is saying, "I want you to change the world," they're kind of funny images. Like it'd sound better maybe if Jesus said, "You are a warrior. you're going to change the world. Quickly turn to your neighbor. Who's your favorite superhero? Very quickly. Okay, Jesus doesn't say, okay, bring those conversations to a close. Jesus doesn't say you're a warrior. Jesus doesn't say you're a caped crusader. Jesus doesn't say you're going to be a massive hero. What Jesus says is that you're salt. What Jesus says is you're light. Like, they're just ordinary, everyday, potentially boring items. Where does salt usually live? Where does salt usually live? Which room of the house? It does in mine anyway, it lives in the kitchen. And thinking about light, well, they just sit in a corner usually, lighting up the room. There's nothing particularly world-changing about them. You see, Jesus isn't saying we all need to be superheroes. He's saying to change the world, you just need to be ordinary people doing the things that you've been created to do, faithful, open, and generous together. Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. Now, in your baskets, you've got some little sachets of salt. Maybe just rip a corner off. Just maybe, if you're up for it, put a bit on your fingers and just taste it. Just have a little taste. Just take a little, you only need a little pinch of salt to taste it. It doesn't take a lot to taste salt. Now, it sounds obvious, but salt only works when it's actually used. Even a little bit of salt gives flavor and it stops things going off. But if you kept that salt safe in the salt shaker, safe in your sachet, it wouldn't taste anything. It would make no difference to anything. And that's the point that Jesus is making. He's saying our faith in Jesus, if it's never shared, if you just leave it in the salt shaker, if you just leave it in your sachet, if you never share your time, your care, your money, slowly your faith will lose its flavor and will lose its purpose. Not because God stops loving us, but because if I left that salt there forever, it can't do what it was made to do. You and I were made to be salt. We were made to be generous. We were made to share everything that God has given us. Generosity is salt-like. It can't go unnoticed. It's often costly. You know, salt in Jesus' time was actually really expensive. But when we share it, even a little bit, it makes life so much richer and flavorful wherever it's shared. Okay, and then Jesus speaks about light. And the thing about light is that Jesus isn't saying here, like, turn your light on, make sure everyone notices you. Like, be flashy. Let the world see you. That's not what Jesus is saying. What he's saying is, how ridiculous would it be to have a light, to turn it on so that people can see by it and then cover it up? How ridiculous would that be? The whole point of having a light is what? To let it shine, exactly. How ridiculous to cover it up. Jesus is not saying, make sure everyone notices you. He's saying, why would you light a lamp and hide it? And the thing about a light in a house, what would happen if it was dark and all your lights were off in the house and there's 4 or 5 of you moving around? What would happen? Yeah, you'd fall over. You can't see what you're doing. It would make life together really difficult. The purpose of light is not to show off and be impressive, but Jesus is calling us not to hide the good things that God has done in our lives. By sharing the good things that God has done in our lives, by reflecting His light, it allows others to live together well. So windows, coming back to windows, there's no point having a window that's covered. Windows are designed to do two things. Windows are designed to let light in and let light out. And you know, spiritually as Christians, we need both. A house with closed windows becomes inward and stagnant, dingy and dark. But a house with open windows becomes breathable. It becomes light. It becomes hospitable. It becomes human. It becomes alive. You see, God doesn't build houses where we hoard grace or hide goodness. He builds houses where life, salt, and light can be shared. And this is where our own story matters here at St. Swithin's. You know, this church exists because over the last 11 years, people chose not to keep the windows shut. We started small. There was just 12 of us when we started here 12 years ago. We had very little, but people gave time, money, energy, courage, faith, and obedience. And look at what we see today, not just here, but at St. Mark's in Grimsby, where we planted a church where we sent our light, at St. Faith's down in the West End. Churches planted, communities saved, lives changed, salt and light shining. That's why we're called the Salt House. You might have seen this little light on the wall downstairs. I think we've got a slide, Caleb, just to come up. You might have seen that on the wall downstairs. It's the reason we're called the Salt House. Actually, this place was built on what used to be the street. The river used to be higher up, and round about here was a gate where all the salt came into the city on the river, and then from here, the salt was distributed around the city. It's why we've called ourselves the Salt House. It's about this passage. We want to be salt and light. And for the last few years, we've been saying the last couple of years, our grant funding, we had a lot of grant funding to help us get going, and that has enabled us to do all you see today. But we've been saying over the last 2 years that has been tailing off, that there'd come a day where that pretty much went. And here's the honest truth. If we don't pray, if we don't give, then actually we're stuck. And as we start this year, as I said right at the beginning of this series, we're facing a gap, actually, of around £70,000 in our finances. Now, our PCC know that for a limited period, we can cover some of that from reserves as we transition to being self-sufficient. But the thing is, reserves run out. And I want to share that this morning. Yes, it's a big financial challenge. But actually, I think it's a spiritual moment for us. Could you just, where you've got your candles, I think you've turned them on, just cover them up for a moment with a little box that you've got on. You see, I believe God's already given us all the light we need, all the resources we need. But it's in prayer that God will show us how it is we take the cover off. How it is that we let our light shine even more. And so over the next month, whether you're small, whether you're big, we'd love to invite you to pray. Not, oh yeah, I'll pray about it kind of prayer, but focused, shared, persistent, windows open prayer. Prayer that's ready to receive, to let in all that God wants to do in us, but also prayer that takes the lid off. Maybe you just want to take the lid off and lets all that God gives us shine out to the world around us. And so we're calling the whole church to pray for a month. We want to pray for a month into this place we find ourselves. And I'd love to ask you to pray for two things over this next month. The first thing is we're going to pray for many. Could you all say many? Could you say it louder? We're going to pray for many. What we want to do is we want to pray for an outpouring of God's Spirit, that we grow in faith and family. What we want to pray is that as God has let the light in, so the light would shine out and we would see many people come to know Jesus. We want to be salt and light, and we want to see many out there. In fact, Pete, Andrew, Rachel, would you just mind just pulling that? We're going to open up our windows. Would you mind just grabbing that foil just very quickly, just tearing it down? Don't be precious. That's it. Wonderful. Brilliant. There we go. Beautiful job. Thank you. You can take that away with you and be a spaceman later. We want to pray that the many out there, can you say many? That the many out there see the light of Jesus shining out from us into the city around us. The second thing we want to pray is into money. Can you say money? We're going to pray that God would show us the financial provision, the money we need in order not to do anything new. This isn't about doing new stuff. It's about sustaining and growing what God is already doing here. And we're going to pray not because God is tight or reluctant and we need to persuade him, but because God chooses to work through us. We can only be a light because he first shines his light on us. And prayer might show us what to do, how to take the cover off and be the kind of people that Jesus describes as letting their light shine before others. It's about keeping the windows open so that what God gives can be received with trust and shared with love. Now that all sounds like a bit of bad news. The good news is since we've been praying, just a few of us, since the 1st of January, during this last month, we've already seen £9,000 given beyond what we'd even planned or expected. We've not particularly broadcast it or talked about it. But already, just as a few people gathered and let God's light in and were generous and shared their salt and light, it's made a difference. And so in a month's time, a month from now, we're going to hold a giving day. A moment to give, but also a moment to share what we've heard God say to us as we've been praying. And whether you're 5 or 95, like as you pray each day for many and for money, we'd love to hear what you think God is saying. Because this is about the whole house of every age growing in faith and growing in family. And you know, Jesus never asks us to save the world. The good news is he's already done that. But he is asking us in our everyday lives, at school, at university, in our workplace, in our communities, to be a people who live with our windows open. Are we a people who live with our windows open, letting God's light come in, and then sharing salt and light with the people around us?